Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Shane Stedman, and tonight we're doing our webinar. We've been doing these weekly webinars. Sorry, I'm gonna start again. So we've been doing these weekly webinars, and tonight's topic is going to be the 3 keys to menopause. I thought this would be a great webinar, something that we haven't done in quite a while, actually talking about hormones. So I wanted to kind of touch on one area of hormones. There's male hormones, female hormones, and then we have menopause. And so to talk about the 3 keys to menopause and give everybody some things that you can work on, some things to think about. I even want to talk about a little bit of testing. So we're going to hope you enjoy this webinar as we kind of dive into this. So probably do about a half-hour presentation. When I lecture on this to other docs, this is easily a one-day topic where we get into the nitty-gritty of hormone levels and fluctuations and cause and effects of abnormal hormone balances and looking at the research with it. So I'm going to condense, all that into about 30 minutes and give you kind of this, just a good kind of solid concept around menopause and some things that you can implement right away. So if you haven't seen any of our webinars, on YouTube or some of our other video channels, this is a little bit about me. So I'm a board certified chiropractic neurologist and a board certified chiropractic nutritionist. So in my practice, I combine these two worlds together. So even when we look and talk about things like menopause, we can look at the neurological aspect of it, and depression, anxiety, insomnia, memory, even cognitive decline that you can see with menopause. So looking at the neurology piece and the nutrition and bringing those two worlds together, I think is really imperative when we're talking about menopause. And so that's kind of the background that I bring. I also lecture. I've been lecturing now for 13 years on topics like this, looking at thyroid, menopause, male hormones, digestion, detox, IBS, et cetera, et cetera. So we do a lot of different functional medicine. We work a lot with autoimmune conditions. We do a lot of TBI, concussion work in our office, and I've been in practice now for 17 years. So we'll just jump right in, and I want to look at the signs and symptoms of menopause. And really, the signs and symptoms are pretty big. There's a lot that you hear from patients. These are some of the general symptoms that you'll see. Insomnia, and this could be either going to sleep or staying asleep. Anxiety, depression, hot flashes, night sweats. And there's actually kind of a difference between, even hot flashes and night sweats when we look at hormones. And so as we kind of go through this webinar, I'll kind of stop and I'll pause. And I'll give some little tidbits around this because I think it's kind of fun to know a few of these little pieces. But, a lot of times when we look at night sweats, we also get an idea of what's going on with our adrenals. And so I'm going to talk about adrenals a little bit more here in a bit, but we can look at adrenal gland function. So if you're running or if you're nervous or you're scared, you'll tend to sweat or become, clammy. And so when you see people that have menopause symptoms like night sweats, you know that the adrenals are most likely playing a role into this. Now, hot flashes, some people have these hot flashes. Some people just talk about having like this temperature elevation where they just become hot and, they open up the windows and that's maybe all they have. So some people say, I'm just hot all the time. Some people say I have hot flashes and night sweats. Some people talk about sweating so much that they have to, change the sheets, change their PJs, change their outfit because they're just drenched. So you definitely hear a lot of hot flashes and night sweats. Now, other things I will hear is, brain fog, fuzziness, foggy thinking, just lack of clear thinking, vaginal dryness, painful intercourse. Those are very, very common to hear as well. And then weight gain and even a decrease in libido. So you start to see that as the hormones change, that you start seeing changes even like in your skin and your hair. The vaginal, canal can change as far as, lubrication goes, or, just the wall, the muscular tone. And then even like libido, just like the want to, the desire, that can also fluctuate and change as well. So, like I said, signs and symptoms are pretty big. There's a lot more symptoms that you can probably look up, on Google or any of the browsers and say, my gosh, there's a lot of symptoms out there. But we'll break this down as we kind of keep going along. Now, this is something I kind of wanted to bring up was a lot of times people say, well, I'm in menopause. Well, I've kind of found over the years that I don't think the terminology is used correctly. And so it's good to kind of like identify where we're at in this process and what it actually means, to be menopause or perimenopause, postmenopause. And so I can explain the process as we go through this, but with most women, right, we have a normal or quote unquote normal cycle, that should happen about 28 days, and this can, come on about every, starting around the ages of 12, 13, 14, give or take a year. And, for some people it ends, kind of around 48 to 52. Some people might be a couple years, earlier than that. Some people could be a couple years later than that. But kind of that time of having a cycle monthly, this is just more of that menstrual cycle, monthly cycle, that everybody's used to. Especially women are used to this. Now, perimenopause is when we're kind of entering in to this phase. So it's kind of like that transition period. Now, peri means around. So perimenopause means you're kind of around menopause, like we're going into it, kind of circling, the transition that a female goes through. And so with this perimenopause, you start to lose ovarian feedback because you're starting to utilize or use up all the eggs that you have. So all women are born with the number of eggs that they'll utilize. And so some women have less, some women have more, some women drop more. So that's where you kind of see some of the variations that come into play. But as you utilize, these eggs, then as you run out, you start to lose a little bit of that ovarian feedback from the pituitary. So inside your brain, your pituitary tries to help regulate, estrogen and progesterone during your menstrual cycles. And it says, okay, the follicle is going to release an egg. And because of this increase in FSH or follicle stimulating hormone, then we're going to have an estrogen surge. And when that estrogen surge takes place, it then sparks, and activates the pituitary to help with luteinizing hormone or LH production. And then LH production helps with, activating the corpus luteum, to have progesterone or to increase progesterone levels. And this is kind of that cycle that you see. So when I talk about ovarian feedback issues, what happens is the pituitary is kind of saying like, what is going on down there? I said I need hormones. I need to have another cycle. We're supposed to have another cycle because that's just what we do every month. And if there's not really a good, ovarian feedback, then you start to see the pituitary hormones will start to elevate. And these are some of the things that we can actually measure a lot of times when patients say, hey, am I menopausal or am I going into menopause? This is when you start looking at the FSH and LH, and we can see, are you starting to see elevations of those hormones? And if those hormones are being elevated, then it's kind of, I usually kind of joke around and say, your pituitary screaming at your ovaries, like, what are you doing down there? And why aren't you doing what I asked you to? What's going on? And that's where you start seeing the follicle stimulating hormone, where the pituitary is just stimulating and stimulating and stimulating because there's not really this feedback and there's no communication. So you're just kind of, it's like a one way, yelling match. So this is what I mean by losing ovarian feedback. And because of that, you start to see changes in hormones and even the rhythm. So you start to see irregular cycles, right? So we'll see, you can have, 4 months without a cycle, and then you have a period, and then maybe it's a really short cycle, and then it's a really long cycle. And then you have 2 cycles back to back, and then you won't have another one for 3 months. And it's just all over the place. And this is kind of part of that ovarian feedback. And a lot of times I joke around and, I say that I kind of imagine that, your body's like, hey, I found one more egg is way back here in the corner behind the bookshelf, and all of a sudden, you think you're in menopause and then your body's like, nope, 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 we're going to have one more cycle. And so this is perimenopause where you're kind of circling what's going to happen and you're going into this transition. So as a result, You see changes in mood and changes in sleep, and you start seeing these changes that are taking place, within the body. And it can be definitely really tough, to go through. And I know, a lot of women say, yeah, you have no idea. And I definitely do not. But, dealing with patients and, and the women that are in my life, you see these things where it's definitely rough, because you're changing hormones. And when you change hormones, you're also changing brain chemistry. And these are some of the things that I don't think people understand or realize that's going on is, when you change estrogen, you're also, altering function of serotonin, or progesterone, is often associated with like GABA or dopamine. And so these neurotransmitters start to fluctuate, and, you start getting moody and irritable and sad, and, having moments of just crying for no reason, and all these different things where you go, I don't know what's wrong with me. This is perimenopause. So I recognize, that it's definitely a tough thing, and this is what we want to talk about: is how do we mitigate this as best we can? How can we modulate this, and what are the things that we can do to support, women that are going through this? Now, here's another piece that I want to give you, that are listening to this, is that really one of the things that I think gets lost, or people definitely do not talk about, is what are the things that you can do before perimenopause? Because really, kind of what and how your health is, how healthy are you? What is the state of your health? Tends to dictate what's going to happen in perimenopause. And they can also dictate what happens when you reach menopause. And so a mentor of mine, Dr. Krasian, I lecture with him, for many years. But one of the PowerPoints that he uses that I love using has, this picture of a storm on the horizon, and this is perimenopause. So you look over the ocean and you can see the storm clouds coming in, right? And then menopause is, and perimenopause going to menopause is now the storm is all over you, and it's raining and thundering and lightning, and it's just the seas are rough, and the waves are going. And this is perimenopause and the whole transition. And then post-menopause is, the rainbow is out, and the skies are blue, and the birds are chirping, and that's what you hope. And I'm sure some women are like, that is not how it is, but this is what you hope. Now, if that storm that's on the horizon, if you're kind of a hot mess, and let's say you're on a water, right, and your boat is crickety and it's not very healthy, and there's leaks in your ship, and then that storm rolls in, you're going to get rocked. But if your boat is solid and stable and, well built and maintained, then you're gonna get rocked back and forth, but you should come out of it pretty well. So I hope that analogy kind of gives you an idea of, like, this is kind of how going from a cycling, female that has normal cycles, to perimenopause, and then to menopause. So in summary, it's really, really important that you are healthy before going into perimenopause. It is important that you're eating well and taking care of yourself and exercising and keeping your stress under control. I understand this is hard. This is things that we talk about all the time in the office. This is super hard, but ideally, this is what should happen, and this is what you should strive for. Okay. So I'll kind of move on to menopause. So menopause is, now we're kind of out of the storm. So perimenopause is kind of, that's the storm, and you're rocking, you're on the ship, on the waves, and the water is going, and it's just a hot mess. And this is perimenopause, that big transition, right? And menopause is when you come out on that back end. And so you do get kind of rocked, right? And so with that, you can have insomnia as a result, and hot flashes, vaginal dryness, the night sweats, fatigue, low libido, thinning hair, dry skin, memory. I mean, we definitely hear like short-term memory loss, and cognition issues, sometimes a little bit of cognitive decline, because the process of perimenopause into menopause is very inflammatory. There's a lot of things going on. So when I talk about, the storm is in, and you're on the ocean, and you're being rocked and tossed and turned, that's kind of the best analogy that I can give, probably from a male standpoint, talking about a female condition, But that's a very inflammatory event. It rocks your world, so there's going to be consequences coming out of that. Um, and that's what we want to talk about too, is what can we do to support that, and how do we make that better. So you see where hormones will fluctuate, the menopause, or estrogen and progesterone and neurotransmitters, all these things are just fluctuating back and forth. So when you come out, you go, okay, where are we at? And it's almost like, okay, the storm passed. Let's count all the heads. Let's check all the, the structure. Let's see how we're doing. Let's take inventory and see how bad things are. And that's kind of where menopause sits. Okay, and so this can last, for a little bit of time. And this is where we go into postmenopause. So postmenopause can last about 4 to 5 years, ideally, and then it should get better over time. So it's kind of like you get your boat rocked, and you are rocked and tossed all over the sea. And then it takes about 4 to 5 years to kind of regroup, to settle down, to normalize, and to kind of complete that transition. So again, this is all ideal. This is what you hope for. And so that's what I want to kind of talk about when we get to the ends of this webinar is, okay, what can we do? And that's important, because you don't just say, hey, you're going to get rocked. That kind of sucks. And I hope you make it through. It's what can we do, and how can we support you? So kind of a first place to go is lab tests. And this is really kind of an important piece. And this I find to be some of the most confusing aspects when it comes to menopause or hormones in general. So you'll find that one practitioner runs blood work, right, on every single patient. And another practitioner says, well, no, blood work is useless and I do urine test. And so then the patient goes, okay, well, then we'll do a urine test. And then you go to another practitioner and they go, you know what? I don't do blood work. I don't do urine. I do saliva. And the patient's like, well, you got to be kidding me. I've already spent money and time trying to figure this out. And now you're telling me there's another way of doing it. So what is the best test? And your answer is really all of them. It honestly depends on what you're looking for. And so I'm going to walk through some of the tests, because I think if I can educate, even some of the doctors that are watching this webinar, I mean, this can help educate some of you guys, but definitely, the public and patients who are like struggling to say, like, what do I do? What do I test? Where do I go? Let's talk about testing, because I think if you can understand that, it might help out a little bit more. So I'll tell you what I do, and I'll tell you why, and then we'll go from there. So there's blood tests, there's saliva tests, and there's urine tests. And my favorite and my bias is towards saliva testing. I use blood testing as well. I would say saliva and blood are my two favorites. And the reason why I like saliva testing is I like how much it can actually cost. It can be pretty inexpensive for the amount of tests that you get. I also like some of the graphs and the charts and the comparisons that they give with that too. So it makes it really easy to explain to the patient, here's what I'm looking at, here's what's going on. And so it kind of takes some of just the raw data out, but it gives you a little bit of conceptual ideas around like what's high and what's low and how out of balance they are. So that's what you'll kind of hear me lean towards in this webinar is saliva testing. But I definitely like blood testing too. There's pieces about it, and I'll talk about kind of what you're looking for. Now, urine testing, so it has some value to it, and I'll kind of describe why I don't use it as much. But we'll kind of go from there, and I'll talk about them talk about each of them. So this is an example of saliva testing, and this is actually one big reason why I like saliva testing is because I feel that when you're looking at hormones, you also need to look at adrenals. So this is an example of an adrenal panel, or they call like an adrenal salivary index. And adrenals, if you're not familiar with adrenals, they're little glands that are on top of your kidneys, and they try to help regulate, fight or flight responses, sleep wake. They give you adrenaline. They can also help with blood sugar stability, and so they're involved in like every aspect of your day. But they're actually pretty intimately involved in even hormone pathways. So progesterone can help to feed into cortisol, So a lot of times when you see people that have very low cortisol levels, it's really common to see that they might have low progesterone levels as well. And so I like to look at that because if somebody does have low progesterone, then my question is like, well, what does the cortisol look like? And so to get all of this under one test is so great. And that's what I really love about saliva. So I'll kind of explain how, what this looks like. And again, when you look at the graphs, most people can look at this and say, oh, I see what's going on. The green shaded area is normal and the blue line is the patient. So this gives us an idea of looking at sleep wake cycles. We can sometimes look, why is somebody tired in the morning but they have a ton of energy at night? Why does somebody crash around noon but they do well for the rest of the day? And so when you spit with this test, you're actually looking at these different timelines, and then you can run those data points together and say, hey, this is what the overall day looks like for a patient. And most of the time, they match up pretty well with what the patient is describing. So this is kind of a case where this is actually fairly normal. There could be a little, maybe a touch too much cortisol in the evening time, but and this is not a case. This is just a great example of kind of what I'm talking about. But you can kind of get an idea of where maybe somebody should be. So you always should be high in the morning, and then you have a nice slope downwards into the evening. So this person does a pretty decent job. If you look at the numbers, it goes 19, 7, 6, and 4. So there's definitely kind of that slope throughout the day. And their overall burden is 36. So they're producing enough cortisol. They have a pretty decent rhythm. Now, if I go to the next slide, this is also looking at DHEA. And DHEA is another hormone. So if you were to look at the hormone pathway, a lot of times it starts with pregnenolone, and that's what your body makes this every day. And then pregnenolone will go into two hormones, kind of like a fork in the road. One of them is towards progesterone, and the other one is into DHEA. And so a lot of times you'll hear people talking about things like pregnenolone steal, where the body will steal the pregnenolone and kind of push it towards cortisol. And then other times you can see this where the DHA is really high, so is your body kind of under a stress response. So it gives us a lot of information to find out kind of where's your stress response, how well you might be adapting to stress, and are you kind of stealing or having a pregnenolone steal where you're kind of like taking it all up for survival. And so you kind of see this where basically your hormones kind of go down two major pathways. One is for survival and one's for reproduction. And so if you're constantly in the survival mode, then a lot of those hormones for reproduction just aren't as great as they should be. And this is why you tend to hear some of these cases where people struggle to get pregnant, and then when they finally decide to adopt, they get pregnant. Or when they decide, what, we're just not going to get pregnant and it is what it is, boom, they get pregnant. Or they go on vacation and boom, they get pregnant. So cortisol and adrenals play a pretty significant role in looking at how hormone levels are. Again, when I was talking about earlier, looking at the storm on the horizon and making sure that you're healthy, this is actually one of those areas that I'm talking about. You kind of want to make sure that your adrenal system is functioning well so that as you go into perimenopause, this adrenal system isn't taking a beating, that your fight or flight and your inflammatory system isn't going haywire. So this is one of those areas I'm like, hey, if you're going into perimenopause, you should really make sure that your adrenals are stable and that your stress is under control and that stress management is part of your curriculum. So this is just a great example of kind of some of the things I like to look at. So this is an example of a postmenopausal panel. So by the same company, this is Diagnostics. So you can look at these different pieces where we can look at free testosterone, estrone, estradiol, estriol, and the three different estrogens. You have really strong estrogen and you have weak estrogens. And then we look at progesterone, and then follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And so what's really great about this is we can start to get a picture of what's going on in the person's system. So now we have cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, estrogens, progesterone, FSH, and LH. So now one reason why I like saliva, if you kind of look at the bottom with FSH and LH, is that this is kind of one of the few places where you do see the pituitary hormones being measured. And that I find to be really helpful. I know that we don't necessarily get a good ovarian feedback loop, but sometimes if somebody's taken hormone replacement therapy, it could be suppressive towards this. Or, if somebody is in perimenopause, where are they sitting? And a lot of times, like the follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone on this test will say, usually like greater than 750, or you'll see up there around 500. The LH definitely can sit close to 200 or above, and that's when okay, yeah, this person's definitely in menopause. Now on here, I would look at things like we a lot of times we'll use the HRT range, of 100 to 300 for menopause panels, and in this case, I would say the progesterone's on the low end, and this can definitely cause a lot of issues with energy and even some anxiety. Sometimes sleep can be really a big part of progesterone. So when you start looking at hormones, like you can kind of start tying these hormones into the neurotransmitters and into some of the symptoms that people have. So this kind of, these are, I can go into this for days and days and days, but I want to kind of show you an example of saliva hormones. Now, the important piece of saliva hormones for you to know is that these are free fractioned hormones. So if you ever look on blood work, sometimes you'll see where they say free and total testosterone. So that free hormone actually gives us an idea of like how much is available to be utilized. And hormones are kind of broken off and they become free right before they stimulate the target site or the tissue that they're closest to. So I like to look at the free hormones and kind of get an idea of what's available to us. And this is kind of the difference between this and serum. So when we look at blood work, so this is an example of blood. So we can look at cortisol, but the downside that on cortisol is that with the saliva test, we can have people spit multiple times a day, and we can actually look at different times of day for cortisol levels. Where here you're getting a blood draw with a needle, and people don't really have a desire to go get a blood draw 4 times a day, and plus the labs aren't usually open that late. So it's much easier to do a saliva cortisol panel and get an idea of the graph. And then DHEA is on there: estradiol, pregnenolone, progesterone, testosterone. So the difference with this in saliva is that these are protein-bound hormones. So they're not free fraction. So this is what the gland makes and produces, and is bound. So they're bound pretty quick to a protein, and that's how your body transports them. So think of the protein like an Uber, right? So we have hormones that are attached, or they take a ride in an Uber and they go to wherever they need to go. And then they get out of the Uber, and that's what they stimulate the tissue. So you can kind of measure the hormones that are in an Uber, and you can measure the hormones that are sitting outside of the Uber waiting to go into the building. So the blood work looks at all of the hormones that are riding in an Uber or in Lyft. So it can be really good. So we can kind of get an idea of like how well are the hormones being produced, and the saliva gives us an idea of how much do we have available to stimulate all the target tissues. Now the last one is this is a Dutch test. So Dutch looks at urine, and so it looks at urine analysis. And so urine analysis can be really helpful because they can help us get an idea of things like estrogen metabolism. So, are you clearing out all of the excess hormones that are in your body, or are you even just clearing out the hormones that you have? And so sometimes you can disrupt cycles and hormones and create all these symptoms if you have too much or too little hormones that are being cleared out. So I think this is a great test. My struggle on this is, again, I like to know pituitary hormones, and it's tough to measure pituitary hormones on a urine test. And then also we're looking at clearance. So how well are you clearing out through the kidneys and liver? Your different hormones. So anytime that I'm looking for clearance issues, or if somebody's estrogen dominant, things like that, I'll definitely utilize more of these type of urine tests. But for me, for functionality, follow-ups, quickness, comparison, cost, I really like the saliva. It's nice to have a kit, give it to a patient. You can spit one day, send it off in the mail, and then usually we'll get it back in about 2 weeks, and it'll give me an idea of what's going on. So um, that's kind of your thing on test, and it just starts to give you a bigger picture of maybe why you're having some of these hormonal symptoms. So now the question is like, well, what do we do about all this, right? Um, and that's why I'll touch on some of the supplements because I think this is what a lot of people kind of want to know is like, what supplements can you use? And I think a lot of people say, well, what's the silver bullet? What is the thing to get rid of my hot flashes? And yeah, if I had hot flashes, I would definitely be on board with, okay, we got to get rid of this now. But the thing is like you really want to figure out why do you have these hormonal imbalances, and in theory, if you can figure out the why and you can fix that why, then a lot of times the hormones and these symptoms should go away, or at least perimenopause should be much easier to handle. So, firstly, I want to give you, and this might sound crazy, but I actually want to talk about dietary changes. One big reason this is something you can control. There's not a sometimes there's things in life we just can't control. There's stress in the world. There could be stress with family, stress with jobs, but what you put in your mouth is definitely something you can control. And one of the things that when you look at hormones in general, it doesn't matter if it's a male, a female that's cycling, a female that's in menopause, or even like a high school female that's starting to have cycles. Some of the biggest pieces that you see is diet. You see this a lot more in the high school population where some of these females they just don't eat very well, and I think high school kids in general just don't eat well. And so we see a lot of kids, and you hear all these stories that high school was rough, and my cycles were really bad, and I was put on birth control pills, and that's a story you almost hear all the time. High school was rough, my cycles were bad, I was really painful, I couldn't go to school, had heavy bleeding, and they put me on birth control pills. But if you kind of look at some of the stuff that goes on in high school, their blood sugars all over the place. Or you have kids who are athletes, or you have some people who are skipping meals and skipping breakfast, and sleeping, going to bed incredibly late, getting up late, not eating breakfast, and then eating junk food for lunch. Man, this is a foundational piece that you can control, where you can work on stabilizing blood sugar and getting good fat and getting good protein into your diet and eliminating food that are inflammatory. So all your different like chips that are unhealthy and sodas and junk food and candy bars and things like that, these are things that are not going to help hormone levels whatsoever. And what a lot of people don't understand either is that some of these hormones are actually converted in your digestive system. And some of these supplements that you take that can help with menopause, those are also converted in your digestive tract. And that your gut bacteria or the flora that's in your digestive tract also play a massive role with hormone regulations and all sorts of things in your body. So really, if your gut is a mess, you're going to be a mess. And if you're not eating healthy, that's going to have a massive impact on you. And it doesn't matter if you're in high school or if you're in reproductive years or if you're in menopause. And you kind of see this with patients that we start working with patients and then they start having a flare up of their symptoms. And lo and behold, they're either like really stressed out or and eating unhealthy, or they just started eating unhealthy because it was the holiday season, right? So these are things that, again, you all can control what goes into your mouth. And I think stabilizing blood sugar and reducing those inflammatory foods is a great place to start. You'll hear different things like phytoestrogens and phytochemicals and essential fatty acids and oils that are healthy for you. All these play a massive role in hormones. And so if you're eating vegetables and good fats and fish and avocado and nuts and seeds, these are things that can actually help with hormones. Next, supplements. So I know a lot of times people are like, okay, what's the magic supplements to get rid of my hot flash? And you'll hear things like black cohosh and things like that. And sure, if you want to try those, definitely go down to your local place and you can get those type of supplements that support hormones. And if they work, then that's awesome. And if they don't, then you gotta do more work on yourself. But I think the biggest thing when you get into these supplements is that um, well, and I'll back up. So let's talk about adrenals first. I threw adrenals on there because You can utilize adrenal supplements to help. If your adrenals are fluctuating, then your hormones are going to fluctuate. So we need to stabilize adrenals. We need to work on stress management. We need to work on things that lower cortisol, like exercise, going for a walk, hanging out with friends, things that reduce cortisol loads and stresses. Those are things that are important to do. Now, adrenals come in because we can utilize things like adaptogenic herbs, which are like holy basil leaf and rhodiola and ashwagandha. These are all different types of adaptogenic herbs that can be really beneficial for people that are suffering with, menopause symptoms. Other adrenal supports you'll see are like licorice root and phosphatidylserine. And different adrenal supports do different things to the body. So, if you have somebody who does functional medicine or nutrition that's well versed in this, these are things that they can help you out. And in my office, these are things that we do based on looking at the adrenal panel. So, based on that adrenal panel and how the cortisol is going throughout the day, gives me a good idea on how to support the patient. Now, adrenals and blood sugar, they tend to go together. So, usually, if your adrenals are high, your blood sugar can be high. If your adrenal function is low, your blood sugar can be low. And if they're fluctuating, then so is your blood sugar and so is your hormones. So, they kind of all just play together. And if one system's off, then the other systems can easily go off as well. The next one I put in here is called SERMs, or selective estrogen receptor modulators. So I'll say it again, selective estrogen receptor modulators. And what SERMs do is they support the receptor site for estrogen. And these are things that you're actually familiar with, like black cohosh, that you see in a lot of these supplements if you went to, a supplement store. But the thing about those and this is what I was alluding to earlier, is that a lot of these SERMs are actually converted in the digestive tract. So if you have an unhealthy digestive tract, or you're not eating very well, or you have leaky gut or some of these other digestive imbalances, those SERMs may not convert very well for you. So this leads to some of the questions of, why did black cohosh help my friend and not help me? Well, a couple things. A, it was probably not the right mechanism. So black cohosh was not going to help your cause. Or you have a kind of an unhealthy gut and you couldn't convert the black cohosh into these selective estrogen receptor modulators that can help with hot flashes. So those are the kind of a couple things that you got to look out, when you're looking at these types of things. And if you want to Google SERMs, you can definitely do it. It's a pretty well known term it'll tell you which different types of products are SERMs. Now, liver support is important because you have to clear out the hormones. If you're not clearing out your hormones and your detox pathways are not well balanced, they're not very functional, you may not have a liver issue, but if your detox system is not doing well, then you can have issues with clearing out hormones, and this can lead to a hormonal imbalance. Your liver is the biggest area, especially when you get into methylation groups or methyl groups. These are things to help clear out estrogen. So you really need a good liver support. So again, this goes back to if you're drinking all the time and eating unhealthy, breathing in chemicals, things like that, where your liver is constantly working and working and working, and then you go into perimenopause, it's going to be a little bit of rough waters. And then we talked about digestive support. So I've already kind of mentioned that. These are things that you can work on and control, somewhat with diet. There's definitely some supplements that you can use as well, like glutamine and aloe, marshmallow root, slippery elm. These are different things that you can utilize to help support the digestive tract. Neurologically, there's times that we'll have to support some of the neurotransmitters. So somebody has a serotonin imbalance and then their estrogen is fluctuating, then that can really create some more imbalances. So there are times that we'll actually utilize, 5-HTP or GABA, or tyrosine, and in some of these herbals that can really support the neurotransmitters. But there's times that you might need to support the neurotransmitters while you're kind of going through the storm. And so we want to support, make sure that their mood is okay, and there's not really a big depression, libido, anxiety component. So so I put this in there because this is something that might be helpful. GABA can also be helpful with insomnia. 5-HTP or serotonin support can convert to melatonin, and that can be helpful with insomnia. So there's different pieces that we just have to look at. Sometimes you're just supporting somebody while they're going through the storm. There's other times we're fixing people after the storm and fixing their boat, and there's other times when we get those patients to say, "Hey, menopause is around the corner," and or perimenopause, and I would love to get myself together. And so these are some of the tools in our toolbox that we'll use. So in conclusion, like I said, we can kind of go on and on and on about this, but there's kind of three key pieces or three things that can help with menopause. And so this is what I want to kind of present to you. Is the first one is adrenals. Life can be hard, and if you talk to anybody, pretty much most people, there's things that are hard. Life is hard, and doing life is hard. And so supporting yourself, self-care, going for walks, exercise, yoga, meditation, deep breathing, going for swims, going for a bike ride, hiking, all those things. I can't state loud enough how important those things are to health. And I know a lot of people say, I just don't have the time. You don't get it. You don't understand. Um, and I can say I do, so we can start comparing notes. But the the thing is like this is still important no matter what. So if you can carve out somewhere, 20, 30 minutes a day that is self-care and stress management, stress reduction, going for a walk, you will be shocked on how much that can benefit anybody. So adrenal stress, and so I'm kind of coupling that with management and exercise. You've got to work on your adrenals. If you need nutritional support or supplemental support, adaptogens or ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil leaf, all those different things, these things can be helpful. But definitely do the things that you also have control of. Blood sugar stability. So this is something, again, I'm picking stuff. This is easy. You can decide if you're going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you can make it a point to make sure you're having, healthy fat and good protein, you know, with every meal, and making sure that your blood sugar is not on a roller coaster throughout the day. So this is simple things that you can do. And then lastly, I really didn't touch much into it, but essential fatty acids, these are, if you look at the research, there's a ton of research on how essential fats are really impactful upon these hormone receptor sites and helping to modulate and regulate. And you hear stuff like this where people take like blackcurrant seed oil, they'll do fish oil, primrose oil. These are different types of essential fats that people actually utilize to help with hormones out there. I mean, this is not a secret. But again, you can utilize essential fatty acids, which can also help with brain inflammation and brain fog and focus and memory and concentration, body inflammation, all these different pieces. Essential fats have huge, huge mechanisms throughout the whole body that can be beneficial. So, obviously you can go and you can get on hormones. We can have a whole nother webinar on, pellets versus creams versus sublinguals versus troches versus patches. I mean, you can get on all these different medications. And for some people, absolutely that is the best way to go. But I think there's a lot of people that don't address these three things. And I think if you address these three things, you might find that you don't need as much intervention as you thought. And I've seen it in my practice for 17 years now. I know I'll continue to see this, but these are things that you guys can do to really support yourself. These are foundational things. Even if we talked about male hormones, these are almost like the three major things that I almost promise you, if I have a guy just follow some of these three easy steps, he will make massive changes and his spouse will probably be upset because that's just how it seems to work. So these are foundational things that if you're not working on the foundations, then it's going to be an uphill battle. And then you just might end up on hormones, forever. And there's a time and a place, but I would rather try this and see where it goes next. If you want, so, we're always on the radio, so you can listen to, Jake and Dr. Maynard and myself. We're always on the radio on Mondays. So we have a show that we go over different health topics. So tune in and listen, and you can actually, call the radio show and ask us questions. So, you get a half hour of those times. You get, the webinar is, for you guys as well. So always listen in and ask questions. We're always happy to help. And then finally, so telehealth is available. We offer free consultations. That if you would love to learn more about us, our clinic, the doctors, what we can do to help you, then we always do a free 30-minute consultation where we can answer those questions. And if it's a great fit, then we'll move forward. And if it's not, then it was great talking with everybody that we get to talk to. So we hope that we can be a part of your journey and help you out, with all your different health concerns. So you can call for a free 30-minute consultation. Our number is there, 303-781-5617. You can also go to our website, integratedhealthdenver.com, and you can actually schedule, fill out a form there. If we also have our brain center. So, you can always check us out at integratedbraincenters.com. But you can go to our YouTube channels and you can listen to more of our webinars that we presented on different health topics. You can also go to our blog, that's on the website, and read each of our articles. We also write articles for the Brain Health magazine, and we'll also be coming out with an anthology book on brain injuries as well. So there's a lot that you can, that we're basically just giving a ton of information out to you guys to help you on your health journey. And if we can be a part of it, we would love to. Call us and schedule that free consultation at 303-781-5617. So I thank you all for being a part of our webinar, and look forward to seeing you on the next video. So yeah, just click the next video that comes up and you can watch us on another topic. So let us know if we can help, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening. Thanks.